Actually, once I found out that that book was needed according to neuroscience and that no one had one yet, I knew exactly what to do because I just used my method instead of someone else's. And like I have to explain here too, is that everyone's method is great. There's no bad methods really, and my method's not superior to anyone else's. It's just that you have to be consistent. And people were not being consistent. They still aren't being consistent. So when you teach a kid 6 different ways to do something, they can't put it together and make one way out of it because they don't have that part of their brain yet that does that kind of operation.
A few years ago, I started writing a fictitious story based on my time as an educator. It is called Taught, and the story was partially inspired out of anger and frustration fueled by burnout. Okay, actually it was more than partially inspired by anger and frustration. But Taught has also become a vehicle for me to tell what I thought at the time, and in some ways continue to think, was and is the real story of teaching. I now realize that my perspective is not everyone's perspective, but there are some pieces of Taught that resonated with many educators. This podcast is an extension of that story, and I, a former teacher, will interview other educators asking them to share how they really feel about the current state of education. Why are so many teachers burn out? Why are so many, like me, leaving the field? We likely won't solve any problems or come up with any solutions, but we can create a community of voices that maybe begin the conversation around how educators can take back teaching. I'm Melissa LaFleur. Welcome to Taught, the podcast. One editing note for this week's episode, our guest's name is Jerry Knoellke. Hey everybody! Today's guest is here to talk about what is becoming an increasingly bad word in education: math. And I know even when I say it, I have listeners out there that are cringing. Actually, my daughter's in the other room right now doing her math homework, and she's definitely cringing. The last couple of years that I was teaching, I noticed that my students in 5th grade were more and more what I like to call math resistant. And despite being really a reading and writing teacher at heart, I found myself becoming a huge advocate for making math a bigger focus in the classroom. I think part of this is because I was noticing more and more students coming to me with fewer and fewer basic math skills, and we have to have the basics in order to do the 5th grade math. My guest today is Jerry. And Jerry is here to talk to us about how math does not have to be a bad word in education. Jerry believes that math can be saved by using what he calls the press method. And I really hope that what he talks about today can help some of us change the way that we think about math. Jerry Knoellke is retired from the AT&T business research team, and he also had a career as a high school math teacher. These two experiences led him to write his book, Math is Not Magic, and it will be linked in today's show notes. And he is also using his knowledge and time in the teaching world to put resources in the hands of all math teachers. And that includes you parents who are out there trying to supplement the math education of your children. His goal is for all of us to be able to teach math in effective ways that kids will understand. Today, Jerry's going to talk to us about some of the things he thinks are leading math teachers to burnout, as well as how teaching his press method will help math teachers avoid some of the pitfalls of burnout. Jerry, thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Melissa. When I started teaching math, I found that the biggest, really only challenge in teaching was to explain to the students how to solve word problems. Now, the main purpose of math is to teach students how to think logically. And word problems are the heart of explaining math logic. I did my research. I found most math teachers were no more successful than I. So I looked into it. Thankfully, I found that neuroscience had recently discovered the cause of students not being able to convert English into Mathish. Neuroscience found that the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain used to analyze abstract thoughts. Word problems fall into the category of abstract thoughts. What they found is that the DLPC does not mature in the average person until their mid-20s.
Wow.
Yet today, we are still asking the average teenagers to use what they do not yet have because they're not that old. The 10% that mature early are the A students. The other 90% need us to change how we teach math. Right now, we explain many different methods, hoping the students will piece them together. But neuroscience explains that this will not work for the 90% that do not yet have a mature DLPC. They need to have one consistent universal method given to them that they can focus on and learn so they will not be confused by multiple methods. I searched and found no one doing this, so I wrote the primer, Math is Not Magic. The primer explains one consistent universal method for solving word problems across all math subjects taught in high school. So as of right now, there's only one primer out there for anybody.
Yeah.
So that gives me an advantage if we can just get people to do it. If we put this primer into all math curriculum, we will be providing the 90% with what neuroscience has explained they need. If all teachers, students, and parents use one consistent universal method, then the 90% can focus on the steps they need to learn and follow. They'll stop being confused by multiple methods due to their immature DLPC, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Yes, no matter who they ask for help, they will get consistent help and will move forward. Imagine a world filled with logical people. Now that will stop teachers from feeling burned out.
Well, for sure. I definitely agree with you. Some sort of methodology behind the pedagogy would be very nice. I only taught math up to sixth grade. But even then, I know that oftentimes what I was doing looked much different than what the other sixth grade teacher was doing. We just had different teaching styles in general. But also, my sixth grade teaching partner, for 3 years, best teaching partner I ever had, but he was male. And he actually, and I don't want to say, this is not a gender thing,
Well, you're
but
picking on us.
I was creating like all of these, scenarios and all of these things. And he was doing, his teaching style was just completely different. His scenarios were even different. And we ended up coming up with, we had an intervention time that we created ourselves because we found that kids were lacking building blocks. But even those building blocks he taught differently than I did. I had a lot of words. I'm an English language arts teacher at heart, so I used a lot of words and he did not.
And you're
He used
female too, yeah.
That's true. He did a lot of kind of forcing kids to mess up and redo. That was kind of
Hmm.
his teaching style.
It's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they weren't necessarily getting the right answers, but he just had them do the same kinds of problems over and over and over until something clicked for them. So
That's
anyway,
the key right there, over and over. Yep.
I was an explainer and they weren't getting it half the time, no matter how I
That's
explained it.
now you know why, because their DLPC was not mature yet.
Yeah. Well, exactly how long were you in education? And can you tell us how that experience shaped your drive to write this book?
Well, I retired from AT&T in business research at about 50 years old. And then I taught for 10 years. And as I got carried away and explained earlier, after several years, I looked into other teachers for answers and getting none. Neuroscience explained to me that they had recently discovered what we need. Finding no one was doing what neuroscience discovered was the best path to follow. I took the challenge and am looking to get everyone involved. This is my quest, not my guest, but my quest. My quest is my guest to help math teachers and teach logic to our students.
Yeah. How long did it take you to write your book?
Actually, once I found out that that book was needed according to neuroscience and that no one had one yet, I knew exactly what to do because I just used my method instead of someone else's. And like I have to explain here too, is that everyone's method is great. There's no bad methods really, and my method's not superior to anyone else's. It's just that you have to be consistent. And people were not being consistent; they still aren't being consistent. So when you teach a kid six different ways to do something, they can't put it together and make one way out of it because they don't have that part of their brain yet that does that kind of operation. So we have to be consistent, like your old teacher friend there that just keeps beating it into them. And as long as they have just one way to look at it, they can finally pick it up eventually.
Well, you know what's interesting is that we had some changes happen in education, and with the invention of the Common Core and kind of the putting that out there. I mean, like I said, I my love and passion is English language arts, and that's what I taught most of my career until I went into the elementary classroom, and then I had to teach all the subjects. And by the time I got there, Common Core had been in for a bit. And every curriculum that I used three different math curriculums. Every one of them taught that you had to teach more than one method to solve any sort of equation. And it was very interesting to hear your take on this, which is that potentially is creating barriers
Yes,
rather
as a
than
matter of
helping
fact,
kids.
and it's not just me, that's all of neuroscience. They're the ones who discovered it. I'm just passing the word on from them because they're not passing it on very well themselves. But all of this science out there showed that, well, here you got a brain that you want to use, and the part you want to use isn't there yet. And so now the kids are developing this blank stare because they can't follow 10 different ways to look at something. And
Yeah.
so we're old enough, we think they should be able to because we can, but nope, there's a difference. Our brain actually, believe it or not, is more mature than a kid's brain.
Well, I mean, I can just compare my own brain to like 10 years ago, and I know that changes happen. Every decade, all of us have different things happen within our brains. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, this podcast is about burnout and it's kind of something interesting. I told my husband, I said, man, I've got to do my research on this because I'm quite certain that math teachers burn out much more quickly. And my husband said, why do you think that? He said, I'm going to bet that you find out that they're burning out at the same rate that everybody else is burned out. And he wasn't wrong, but I wasn't wrong either because there just isn't any research out there that I could find. Listeners, if somebody out there has come across content level teaching and who's burning out more quickly, please let me know. But I didn't find any big longitudinal studies for math teachers specifically. We have a math teacher shortage for sure.
Yeah.
But we did not have, there was nothing out there saying, oh, math teachers are burning out any more quickly than any other part of education. But
A
we do
quick note on
know,
a quick note on your shortage there. From what I've discovered since I was in both the business world and the math world, is that I found a lot of people coming from schools that were very smart in teaching math, but they quit because they could get more income by going to the business world.
well,
So
that's what
math,
I was going to say, Jerry,
yeah,
is
and
that
math education can
while,
attract the right people.
while the burnout rate wasn't high, what's called attrition, the attrition rate for math teachers was pretty high,
Yeah,
that they just don't stick with it for very long.
because they can make more money by doing less work.
Teaching is a lot of work. You're right about that.
Yes, it is. That's another burnout reason. Yep.
So, do you have a burnout story for us?
I had a student say to me one time, "Why should I learn math? Forget math. Just teach me something that'll help me make the most money." And that they did not understand that they need to learn logic, and that was my spirit killer right there. Because logic is probably once you're old enough, like we are now, we can see that logic is important. And since we've got that DLPC going for us, we can think of several different ways of doing the same thing. And that's where English has actually more fun than math for students because they can look at things from different ways and be more creative. Whereas math is not a matter of being creative, it's a matter of being correct.
Yes. Yes, but there's also a similar bond with critical thinking skills though, and
Yeah.
finding patterns and trying to get to your answer by knowing how to look at things critically. So there's and I don't know if this is true or not. I probably shouldn't say it on the podcast without doing the research, but I'm a grammarian. I really like grammar, which is the side of English that most people don't like. But man,
So it doesn't.
I
So it doesn't
loved
mean you're. That doesn't mean you're a grandma.
Not yet. Not
Oh,
yet. I have a daughter getting married, so you never know,
ooh,
but right
yeah.
now I'm not. But when I love to diagram sentences, and somebody did a research study at some point, don't know who it was, it's really old, but they found that people who like to dissect sentences tend to be stronger mathematicians. And I think
Yep.
it really is just that same piece of finding patterns. And I like to solve puzzles. All of that is kind of the same. It makes my brain work in the same way. Um,
Yep. If
so
I
I
had a
bet,
motto, my motto would be the word patterns. That's what life's about for me. Yep.
yeah, especially with you working with the word problems,
Hmm.
and then having to find the mathematical patterns in there. But I can see where it would be disheartening to have kids say to you, they see no purpose in being able to think logically.
Yes, that's true.
So, one of the things that drives burnout is the feeling of not having the resources we need to get the curriculum to the kiddos. How do you think your book's going to help with that?
Well, according to neuroscience again, I'm going to continue to quote those guys because they're the power behind all this. They said kids have to learn one way to do it, and right now there's only one book out there they can use as a primer. This is it. Math is not magic. So if everyone uses it, then we'll have everyone looking at the same way of doing something. And when their kids, before their matured brains hit, they need only one way because that's all they can understand is one way. So that's where the book is going to help a lot. And I can tell you little funny stories there too. Maybe we'll get to that later. But that primer will give the students what they're now lacking. They don't have one particular direction to concentrate on. They don't have that at all. What they have is people like you and me that are teachers that are older that want to do things our way because, well, human nature is to have an ego. You want things done your way.
It's true.
And kids don't have that yet because they haven't got that brain working like they want it to yet. So now when I try to reach teachers, almost every one of them says, I agree with you that that would probably work, but my way's better. And so I can't get a lot of followers yet. I've got to keep working on that. That's my main challenge right there.
Yeah, I was just speaking with he was actually an administrator anyway, and we were talking about how that becomes part of the problem once you get into middle school and high school. And I will own it. I thought that what I was teaching should be the most important thing to my students.
Of
But
course,
every other teacher feels the same way once we get into content specific teaching. We're,
unfortunately.
yeah. And then it's hard to convince anyone that they need to do anything differently. I
Yeah, but we have to teach the world that science has said, hey guys, human nature wants to do it their way and stuff, and that's great. But if you want it to work, you're more effective following what we found out. And when the kids get older, they can switch over to their way. But until they get that, they can't switch to anything if you don't teach them anything at all. So instead of having the kids sit there with a blank stare, give them one way that'll work, and they can learn one way because when they look for help, if everyone's doing it, no matter who they talk to, they'll get the same answers, and it'll sink in, and they won't be confused by multiple ways of looking at something. So that's what we got to get through to everybody.
Well, to your point, I think that we're going to do a little, not a deep dive, just a little dip into some statistics here, because the statistics are pretty scary. And this is not new. The scary statistics are not new.
No,
So,
never.
so just a quick research dip into national test scores in math. This first statistic comes from an article in NPR, and I will link the article in today's show notes. And
Okay.
it says, while the scores show a drop from the pre-pandemic years, the results also show that there are other factors at work. The decline is even more substantial when compared with scores of a decade ago. The average scores declined 7 points in reading, and these are on the national state assessments, 7 points in reading and 14 points in math. So double the decline in math as there was in reading. And
Yeah.
this one is from the U.S. Department of Education. It says in 2022, the average fourth grade math score decreased by 5 points and was lower than all previous assessment years going back to 2005. The average score was 1 point higher compared to 2003. The average eighth grade mathematics score decreased by 8 points compared to 2019 and was lower than all previous assessment years going back to 2003. In 2022, fourth and eighth grade mathematics scores declined for most states/jurisdictions, as well as for most participating urban districts compared to 2019. These are some scary statistics. And I worked in 3 different school districts. And I looked at math scores for fifth and sixth grade students in every one of those districts, and they never got better, no matter what curriculum we used, no matter what we were doing. So, how do you think math teachers in particular are feeling about their content and the students' ability to understand it?
There's a sideline to that I'm going to give you right now. My personal opinion is all it is, of course, because I'm the only one that counts here.
It's your
Is
interview.
that students today are different than students from 10, 20 years ago because right now they're not taught how to be responsible as much as they used to be taught. They're not taught to listen as well, and they're taught to be independent. And unfortunately, kids and independence usually means converts to laziness, and then they stop listening, and that's how we're having trouble reaching them. So we have to not only give them the right method, like my book will help, my primer here, but we have to make them listen to it too. And so it's a double challenge, actually. It's not just a matter of giving them a tool. If they don't use it, it won't matter.
Right.
So the part I wrote myself for notes on this, I'm going to take a look at them right now.
Go
But
for it.
advancing from arithmetic's pluses and minuses to balancing algebra's equations is just a matter of moving the next level to finding the answers. That's from going to the lower grades, to the middle grades, to the upper grades. And that's basically from someone being younger to being a little bit older. Unfortunately, science has just found out that going from younger to a little bit older doesn't change that part of your brain until you get really older, like in your mid 20s. So we have to stop expecting middle schoolers and high schoolers to act different than grade schoolers. They actually aren't going to act any different, except for maybe that top 10%. They're the ones that had their brain mature a little bit earlier than the rest. And of course, those are our A students because they did mature and they learned to listen and they learned to think, and they can think on their own too because they don't have to just follow one pattern. But the rest of them can't do that. So we have to teach them, or what's the right word to use there? We have to, I don't want to say force, we have to help them, there you go, understand that their brain isn't mature yet. And by the time it is mature, they're out of school. So they have to teach themselves a little differently than the A students do, because the A students are lucky. They got the brain part coming to them early. The rest of them don't have it, so they have to focus more and they have to pay more attention to be more responsible. And so there's some key words there that I don't want to get into because that's probably too heavy discussion about responsibility. But because they're still immature, and as much as we want to believe they're going to mature because they're older, they just don't.
Yeah.
And that's why another big burnout question is that one too, because teachers keep thinking these kids are older now, they should be able to learn. Well, teachers have to learn that the kids can't yet. That's all there is to it. So we have to continue to teach them just like we did in grade school. You continue to reinforce the one method that works, just like math. You got pluses and minuses, and there's only one way to teach that. So they learned it. So there's proof right there that it does work. But they think they can change now that they're a little older, and they really shouldn't. They really have to get back to saying, okay, your brain's not there yet. So they shouldn't probably say that because that doesn't help the kid any. But they got to say, okay, I've got to teach this kid one way so that if all the teachers teach the same way and they have their book that shows it and their parents join in, no matter who they go to for help, they're going to get reinforced with the same focus point. And then all of a sudden they're going to start realizing they can't focus because they're not going to be confused anymore. They have one path to follow. And anyone can do that just like they did when they learned pluses and minuses. So I got off on a tangent there, but
That's okay.
that's basically the whole crux of the matter is we got to get teachers to understand that you got to stop treating kids like they're adults because they're not yet, even at the middle age and the high school age. And I know even when I was growing up, I thought, of course, at that age, you think you're the smartest person in the world. And when I got older, I realized that, when you're in high school, you're still pretty stupid when it comes to understanding how to think logic wise. So that's where it all comes together. We got to make the teachers understand that, okay, start treating those students like they're still young kids because they really are. Their brain is still young. Even if they look taller, they look older, but their brain is still the same size and it's still missing that one piece that it still needs yet.
Yeah.
So anyway, should I get back to my notes and give you a long speech here? Or do you want to try something else?
Well, I want you to tell us a little bit about the press method because I think that our listeners are going to want to know kind of what this method is.
Yeah, and if they get into the book itself, which you can get on Amazon, hint, hint.
And the link will be in the show notes. So
good. That it explains that up front, just a couple short paragraphs, even just a couple pages, that this is the method, and then it shows you how it works. And it has the rest of the book is dedicated to showing all the examples across all the 7 subjects taught in high school of mathematics, from algebra through calculus. And they will have exact examples to look at, see how it works. And like I explained, teachers and parents will both see that it makes sense because they're both over 25 years old. So now if they continue to, if they continue to push this one idea, one way to look at it, the kids won't have to look at different ways and try to get confused. What they're going to do is they're going to look at one way and keep looking at it until it sinks in. And then they can use that one way until they're old enough that, hey, wait a minute, my brain says I could look at it from another point of view. And they can become as impressive as we are now, right? But anyway, like I was saying, what I'm going to say here was that converting English word problems to math equations is not that easy. My primer will provide the tool, press, which will take away the mental block we now have in place. There's that in writing as opposed to my own thoughts at the time. In short, as Aristotle said, the mind thinks in pictures. This has not changed from the cave walls to the pyramids to now. And people have to understand that. Today, everyone thinks of books and they think of everything in terms of words. And the younger mind just doesn't do that yet. It still has to think in terms of pictures. So thus the acronym PRESS. It starts with the letter P, which stands for picture. Teach the students that seeing a picture of what they are trying to solve will help them and their minds focus. The R in PRESS stands for record labels, taken from the word problem. The E stands for equation. Here is where the teacher provides the equation that students need to learn that fits the picture they drew. And the first S stands for substitute labels. The students learn where to put the picture labels into the equation. The last S stands for solve. And that's the end of that part. But at this point, the students have completed translating from English into Mathish. So now they've got this complex English paragraph they were looking at, and they've converted it to Mathish, which is just a bunch of numbers and equal signs and stuff. And now they can look at it in terms of math, how math looks at it. Now you're back to more or less arithmetic days, but they learned to balance the equations and all that. And that takes care of it. All of a sudden, you conquered that problem where the blank stare can go away. And you can say, okay, that complex English can now be put into a picture with numbers on it and labels for variables and whatnot. And that the mind can understand much easier than the words. So now if we can teach kids to do this, they will have something easier to look at and they can move forward again. And they're going to learn logic. And that's my quest, is to get them to all to learn logic.
Right.
When I explain the 5 steps, they're listening parents when I'm tutoring a kid, well, listening, and they'll say, "Why was it never this easy when I was in school?" And I laugh and I explain that is because they are now past their mid-20s. Just that easy. They can pick it up, help their children with their homework. And after their children learn and practice one consistent universal method, they will feel the same and will not develop that blank stare their parents learned in school. And that's my goal, is to get past that. If they don't put up the blank stare, then they won't stop listening, and then they will learn logic. And I just can't wait till the world is a lot more logical place than it is now.
I think we're all excited for that to happen.
Yeah, we got to get there because there's 8 billion people, and if none of them use logic, we're going to have a lot of confusion out there.
Well, as
We'll
you're
get
explaining the press method, it just hits me that this is how we start out teaching math. We call them manipulatives
right,
for
exactly.
children in kindergarten, first grade, sometimes up into second grade, where they have these tangible items. And then those tangible items we then turn into pictures in the curriculum. So they have this skill at the very beginning of their math careers,
There you
right?
go.
And
Yes,
then, but I know as a fifth and sixth grade teacher, we had very few pictures by the time we got into that math.
and that's why we
Um,
have to teach the kids to take that English and turn it back into a picture. Yep.
yep. Yep. Well, we did have the last curriculum that I used had a little I forget what they called it, but it was some little reproducible thing that they could make at the beginning of each unit. So they had to cut it out and, glue things together. And it was
Hmm.
a variety of different things, but it was always the same thing. It was to get them to memorize something. It
Yep.
wasn't necessarily a picture of or manipulative of the actual math that they were going to be doing. And I'm sure anybody listening who teaches above a third grade level is going to say, yes, well, the numbers get really big. The numbers start getting really large, and how are we supposed to create pictures and things like that with these very large numbers? What would you say to that?
Well, if they look at it and they look at themselves, they will find out that the inside pieces on the math, the numbers themselves and the formulas and all the variables, look somewhat complex. But when they look closely at it, they'll find out that an entire equation is just less than one line long. That's not very big.
Yeah.
So the kids can actually focus on that, and they can see what to do that. And like the person just explained to themselves too, that younger kids look for simple ways to look at things. And that's what we have to do, is keep it in a picture, because a picture doesn't move. It's not complex. It doesn't grow. It doesn't shrink. It stays a picture. And
Right.
then they can focus on it. And that's what we have to keep doing, not just stopping in sixth and seventh grade, but actually going on all the way through high school like that. And then there's that top 10% that you're going to bore a little bit because they want to do it their way. And you say, okay, we'll let you do it both ways. But if you can't see that second way, don't get frustrated. Just learn this one way. And then later on, you'll be able to see a second way, and then you'll have your own way of doing it.
This also reminds me, I used a, and I don't know who put it out, so I'm sorry. I'll put a link to this also in today's show notes. It's a resource for teachers, but it's called Yummy Math, and you
Hmm.
do have to pay for it. Have you heard of Yummy Math?
I I know I've heard of it, but I never really paid attention to
Well, it's
it.
scenarios. So they're like using your work, but I don't think they realize they're using your work. So for example, they will give a problem, a word problem, and it will say a grocery store had a display of 12 pack cases of soda, and they made, whatever, a Christmas tree out of 12 packs. So the problem of the day is to figure out how many cans of soda it actually took to make this display. And then they show a picture of the display and they show it from four different angles so you can you can start trying to puzzle it out on your own, but they
Yeah,
give you the picture.
I had to laugh there because I remember seeing a joke more or less one time that explains that only in math can you talk about buying 12 avocados and 500 TV sets and coming up with an answer about something. That never happens in real life.
Right. My daughter just said that. I think hers was cantaloupes. She's like, who would buy 300 cantaloupes, Mom? Like, well, somebody who likes cantaloupe, I guess,
Yeah,
or has a catering business. But I think that's the other thing too. We do have to, when kids ask those questions, they're kind of asking for the logic, aren't they?
exactly. That's the whole heart of mathematics is teaching logic, and the whole heart of teaching to get to math, to get to the logic is using word problems. That's the main tool for teaching logic. So that's my focus all the time.
Well, and this is what I used to say in the classroom when none of us are given a math problem with just the numbers. And, it's like, okay, here's what you have to do, right? If you have an error in your checkbook, that doesn't come with a formula. No,
Yeah.
I'm dating myself here, Jerry. Nobody's balancing their checkbooks anymore.
There you
But you
go.
know what I mean. How about this? If you have an error on your credit card bill, that's probably more relevant in today's society. But
Yeah.
you have to know how to get to the answer. They're not sending you the formula to figure it out.
And that's very true. That today's kids don't see stuff like we used to see it because everything today is on your telephone and pretty much they're always looking at one little screen and it's always constantly changing and most of it's words and they're just not ready for that yet.
Yeah. So, what's your hope for the future of mathematics in the US school system?
To make math understandable and the human race more intelligent. And that's where we have to focus on something as simple as this. We have to take math and say it's not complex. You just take those complex words that we can't see and turn them into a picture that we can see. And there you go. Math isn't complex. And stop worrying about it being hard like your parents did. And when you grow up, you'll laugh at your parents for not seeing what you learned.
I think there's some truth to that. So I know I actually I'm a little bit of a mind reader, and I already know that you're going to answer this question by saying buy your book. So other than buying your book, what is your advice to parents and math teachers right now? How can they begin to turn this train around?
Well, parents, you got to talk to those math teachers and convince them to buy the book too. And again, the main point is kids are only available right now to learn one way of doing something. So focus on that one way. And if you get the book for your kids outside the classroom until they make it part of their curriculum, um, you'll understand it real quick as a parent because you got that ability now. So you'll be able to use that book as well as just as well as a teacher could. And you can help your kids learn because you're going to teach them one method and they're going to see it in black and white in their own book. And they're going to see the pictures in it. They're going to see all the examples and all the great examples covering all the subjects in math. And so parents, don't give up. Help those kids out till the school comes around and joins you. And you guys be the first ones to do it. As a matter of fact, the first 3,000 copies of my book that I sold were to homeschoolers. So that's exactly where it is. The parents are helping out and they like it. They love it a lot because now they have a tool they can use and instead of being confused. Because when they look back, what they learned from math was to stare blankly. And you can't teach that to a kid, or you can actually, but don't. And so I think maybe we have to keep hitting the parents first. And then of course, whatchamacallit got in the way, our disease of the century here, which I can't think of the name of it right now. What was it happening about 10 years, 5, 10 years ago? We all had the case of COVID. Is that it? Yeah. And I don't worry about that kind of stuff. I guess I have a healthy body. I never caught it. But if we can get past those COVID years where school is really confused now, half the kids want to stay home, half of them want to go to school, and no one wants to learn. They want it to just be poured in their heads. And And now they got to learn that it doesn't just get poured in. You got to think. You got to use your brain.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So I think we've covered a lot here today. I would say, I think one of the things that people tend to forget is that for people like you who are trying to look at education from a different perspective and put content out there for people to try, we also need to kind of make a living as well.
Yeah,
So just by purchasing your book, because you've explained press to us, but the book is also going to give those examples and kind of walk people through the method several times over because we'll all be learning that method
yeah.
as well.
And it
But
gives a lot of detail to you.
they're also supporting what you're doing by buying your book, by saying,
That's true.
hey, there are different ways that we can go about things, better ways. So I just want to put a plug out there to anyone that's listening,
I
that
appreciate
at
it.
least go check out Jerry's book. If it's not for you, if you already feel like you're great at math or you're a great math teacher, maybe you can just pass this resource on to somebody who needs a little more help. But
Yeah,
certainly over and over in this podcast, I hear two things from educators and burnout experts, and it is we need to scale back. We need to simplify.
yeah.
So, this is a way that we can do that. And everybody believes there needs to be some change. So, a change that we can make and a simple change to simplify things would be at least giving this a shot. So, anybody who's listening, maybe check it out and see if you can make it work for you or your building.
You made the
Jerry?
point perfectly there about saying that we have to simplify it because people keep thinking that kids get a little older, they can think like an adult, and they just can't yet. So we got to remember to tell people to remember that. We got to change the school to remember that too, so that they can continue to do what successfully they did in the earlier grades, keep it going all the way through high school.
Yep.
And
Make it accessible.
like I like to say, let's catch up to Star Trek someday. We showed that people start thinking intelligently and logically, we can be out in space, we can control the whole universe. We're not going to get there if we don't start now.
No, and something has to change, right? I mean, we can't plop kids in front of computers and expect them to learn because that's not how the brain works either. We
That's
need
exactly.
interaction, we need questioning, we need inquiry, and we need critical thinking skills.
And
But
you made a perfect point there too about the computer. You can't just set a kid in front of it and say, okay, let the computer pour this into you because the computer can't do that.
right,
For math, English, education, anything to work intelligently, you got to have a two-way conversation, not a one-way conversation.
that's right. That's right. Jerry, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we go?
Get involved. Please contact me. Help me get the schools going. Let's get the world moving and let's make everyone more logical. Or as they can say in my motto, press on.
Sounds good to me. You can find all of Jerry's information in today's show notes.
Thank you very much.
I wish I knew.
Today's episode was produced and edited by me. The theme music is by Otis McDonald featuring Joni Inez. If you know someone who might enjoy these conversations, please share the podcast episodes as much and as often as you can. It's as simple as copying the link you use to access today's episode and sending it in a message or sharing it on social media. I'm a small independent operation, and your shares broaden our audience. Perhaps you or someone you know will be inspired to talk about teacher burnout. If you would like to get your voice on my podcast, contact me via the link on my webpage, taught.buzzsprout.com. Coach, speaker, and author Rashid Ogunlaru said, "It may take many voices for people to hear the same message." Join me in being one of the many voices rising up to get the message out around educator burnout. This is Melissa LaFleur. Thank you for listening to Taught, the podcast.
I wish I knew.
have an important reminder/disclaimer to share. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Content provided on this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be taken as professional advice. We encourage you to do your own research and consult with qualified professionals before making any decisions based on the information discussed in this or any other episode. Additionally, any opinions or statements made during the podcast are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, or individual. Listener discretion is advised. Thank you for tuning in.